is April 16th, 2026. This is Washing Machine Music interview number 3, and I'm here with Allan Arkush. Hi.
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 First off, I'm in Los Angeles and you are in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, right?
Yep.
And what is washing machine music? How did you get that title?
Um, I don't know. The Sonic Youth album, Washing Machine. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I've got all the Sonic Youth
I
records.
love
You
them. One of
know.
my favorite bands ever. I wanna interview their stuff
Yeah.
more.
Okay, you've got to stay at the microphone
Okay.
because when you turn away, it doesn't sound as good, and yet have to speak just a little more distinctly
Okay.
than the last time.
Yep.
Okay. So you sent me a list
Mhm.
of questions, uh, and I will sort of endeavor to answer them. Um, okay. One of the questions, this is a logical first one. What was the first movie that really moved you? Let's divide that up a little bit. Okay. The first movie I ever saw was the Disney animated version of Peter Pan.
Mhm.
And that was, I would say, probably about 1952. So I was about 4 years old. Um, at that point, movies were shown in a different manner than obviously than now. Even in a movie theater, a movie would first come into us one theater in each major city, and that would be a nicer, grander presentation of a film. And then from there, after playing in those theaters for a while, it would go to neighborhood theaters. And then after it ran in the neighborhood theaters for a while, it would go to a lesser theater as a double bill. Now, Disney had all these great cartoon features, aside from their shorts. Snow White, Peter Pan, Pinocchio, all these titles. And they would re release them every 6 years. So if I had done my research, I'd know whether that Peter Pan was a re-release or not. In any case, it was my first movie, and we went into Manhattan from New Jersey to see it. And it was playing in one of the biggest theaters in Manhattan. There was two movie theaters in Manhattan that were like movie palaces. Uh, and this one that still exists is called Radio City Music Hall, but they don't run movies anymore. And this one was called the Roxy. So when you went to the Roxy or to some other theaters, you got a stage production, a documentary, in this case, because Disney made these documentaries, and then the feature film. Okay. And some of the feature films, for instance, if you went to see Lawrence of Arabia or a lot of big movies, would start with an overture that was on the print. So it would say overture on the screen, and you'd hear like 3 or 4 minutes of the score. In this case, there was a stage production of acrobats and stuff and animals. This is how I remember it. Whether it really was that way, I can't say. But there was bears on the stage and they were ice skating. Okay. Then there was a documentary by Disney called Bear Country. Disney made a series of live action documentaries by sending out film crews to film the living desert, all different places on the earth. Then they went back and edited them to make a narrative out of it. And they gave names to the different animals that they had sent film crews out to observe. And they played funny music. And this was very entertaining. And then came Peter Pan. Now, to say that I loved Peter Pan is not even, there's no way to express what happened to me in that theater. But it's totally metaphorical because here's a story about boys who want to be boys forever, and they want to live in Never Never Land. Okay, so I am living in Never Never Land during that movie with those boys. and I want to be one of the lost boys and join Peter in Never Neverland. So at the end of the movie, I wouldn't leave the theater and got into a real tussle with my mom about this. And she said there'll be other movies and so forth. So that was my first movie experience, okay, as a child. And so I saw a bunch of the Disney movies aimed at me, but do you know who Jerry Lewis is?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jerry Lewis made movies aimed at me, kids. There was Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, and then Jerry Lewis. So I went and saw every Jerry Lewis movie, and I saw them often with my grandfather, who came from Poland and who really liked Jerry Lewis. And he often called him his real name, which was Joseph Levitch. So we would go to Temple on a Saturday, and have a nice lunch that my grandmother made. It's always a nice lunch. And then we'd go see a Levitch picture down the block. It was a movie theater about 3 blocks from them. And that's where I saw all the Jerry Lewis movies, which kind of explains the connection between Get Crazy. You had asked me about Get Crazy. You use a lot of visual gags in your movies, especially Get Crazy. What inspirations influenced your style? The Jerry Lewis movies. And the inspiration was the director of the Jerry Lewis movies had worked, Frank Tashlin was his name, had worked at Warner Brothers as an animator on Looney Tunes. He's one of the people who created Porky Pig. And he used to have all these, obviously, when you draw gags for cartoons, they have a certain look and stuff. When he started filming live action, he would take those gags and create them in live action format. And I thought that was about the funniest thing I'd ever seen. Okay. So I like that stretching of reality that you saw in the Jerry Lewis movies. For instance, in the Geisha Boy, there is a magician played by Jerry who goes around Asia, Japan in this case, entertaining, and he brings his rabbit with him, Harry. And Harry's the rabbit that he pulls out of the hat, and he takes Harry. Harry becomes a character, and he's anthropomorphized, which is he has human characteristics. So, for instance, when when they're at the hotel, Harry is floating on a raft with his arms up and sunglasses on. And Jerry says, you're going to get sunburnt. And the next time you see Harry, he's all pink. Okay. So this, when people jump into a swimming pool, the waves come up and it empties the pool. I loved all those kinds of gags. Okay. Which led me towards that kind of humor in general. And a perfect example of a movie that takes it to its logical extreme would be a movie called Hell's a Poppin'. Hell's a Poppin' was a movie from the 40s based on a stage play. And do you know what breaking the fourth wall is?
Yeah.
Okay, that movie exists in the fourth wall. The projectionist of the movie is a character in the movie. People get up during the movie and block the screen. They talk back to you, okay? And it's a musical. And it's really makes almost no particular sense. But when I saw it, I would say in the early 70s, I was completely taken with it. And it was an inspiration for my first movie, Hollywood Boulevard. And then Get Crazy was originally called Hell's a Rockin'. So we were trying to do a rock and roll version of Hell's a Poppin'. So that is the kind of influence. But another movie, I liked Westerns. The like Rio Bravo, Howard Hawks movie, Shane, John Ford movies, The Searchers, and Horse Soldiers. So I would go see them. And my parents liked movies, and my father loved movies, and my mother also was, and they liked art pictures. And they were a member of a club where you go and they show you a new art picture every month. You get a pass, you go into New York or something. And so they kept up with those kinds of movies. And when I was about 12 years old, they took me to a theater nearby on a Sunday afternoon. They took me and my sister, which was unexpected, to see a movie called The World of Apu. And it's by an Indian filmmaker named Satyajit Ray. Now, Ray was someone who was interested in cinema. And in India, his first real cinema job, where he was the assistant to a director by the name of Jean Renoir. Do you know who Jean Renoir is?
No.
Okay, Renoir is one of the 5 or 10 greatest directors of all time. Okay. And he did a movie called Rules of the Game, which is considered one of the top movies. It's always on the list of greatest movies. Grand Illusion. He had a very humanistic style. And so he's got this assistant who is, adores him. And they made a movie called The River, which is beautiful. And the assistant has seen Italian neorealism. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay. In Italy, after World War II, during World War II, the Italian film industry was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There was no movies being shown. There was no classic Italian cinema anymore. And Mussolini had passed a law so he could control the content of movies that you couldn't record the dialogue while you were shooting. You had to add it later so that they could check what people were saying in the movies. Okay. And they had a style of movie making based very much on the Hollywood style. Now, since there was no money in cinema anymore, this group of young filmmakers decided to make movies without this Hollywood, make movies about what Italy looked like now after World War II. And so that's what they did. It was called neorealism. They shot the movies, hard to believe that anyone had never done this before, on the street, in people's homes. And since there was no structure for an industry, they shot them often with non-actors who looked and behaved like the characters they were doing. It was revolutionary, and it swept the world. And if you want to see the important ones, you really have to see Bicycle Thieves as one of the first ones, or get on Google and Google neorealism. Okay, so this realistic view of Italian life, and it feels like you are with them. It doesn't feel like there's artifice.
It sounds very interesting.
And what?
I'm saying it just sounds very, very interesting.
It is. You will be incredibly moved by it. I highly recommend it. It'll be very formative to you. A famous director whose life was changed by these Italian neorealism movies was Martin Scorsese. Okay. And his parents, being Italian, went to see these movies. So anyway, Ray, this young man, wants to take this realistic style and do it about India. Because Indian movies, this is like the early 50s, are Bollywood.
Mm-hmm.
They're musicals. There's no realism involved at all. And Jean Renoir encourages him, and he makes a movie called Patha Panchali about the lowest caste of people in India in a village. They have nothing, okay? And they are existence. And this must have been something that Ray really understood. And he gets his friend to shoot the movie, and the friend has never shot a film before. Uh, he has only shot wedding photos. Okay. And they can't afford sound all the time. And they shoot it on weekends. And because they can't afford dialogue recording all the time, they hire a musician to play a score that goes over the whole movie. And that person's name is Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar becomes the most important Indian musician of all time. He represents India. When it gets to the 60s, he's a god because he plays raga. That's who George Harrison and the Beatles learned how to play sitar from. Okay, so they take me to this movie. And a Jewish kid from New Jersey seeing what life is like in Bombay, because the one I saw was the third of the three. And the level of, well, certainly poverty, and this character in this movie is now grown. And I've since seen them, they're all on Criterion. And he is a tutor, he has no money. And he's writing a book about love. These are things that are all way over the head of a 12-year-old. I'm adjusting to the fact that I'd seen black and white, obviously, but I'd never seen a movie in another language. And I'd never seen a movie that wasn't a glossy recreation of another world. This was a world that I was being told this is the way life is. And it's about fathers and sons. And I don't want to go into the whole storyline of it. But at the end of the movie, there's two things in the movie. He's writing a book about love. And his best friend tells him, you can't write about love unless you've never been in love. And the argument goes, well, I'm an artist. At a certain point in the movie, at a key moment, he realizes that he doesn't know anything about love. And he's been through terrible, terrible things in his life, including the death of his wife. And he takes his book, and he's become a traveling nomad in India. And he takes the book, which he's still working on, out of his backpack, and he throws it off a mountain. And the pages fly down into the jungle. That rocked a 12-year-old's world. The act of it, the visual of it, the unexpected nature of it, and the fact that I couldn't really understand it, but I knew it was profound. And at the end, the father and the son are reunited. That movie was significant for me on many, many levels. As movie storytelling was obviously something I'd never seen before. As a view of another culture, it was. And my parents were progressive, and they used to take us to museums. And so I saw a lot of stuff from other cultures, and we kept books around of photos, and some of them were other cultures. So now I had a living example of diversity. And it left a huge impression on me about being curious and finding out about the rest of the world. Parallel to this was my love of music. And first off, I love music in movies. Okay. That was the first songs I liked, were the theme songs from movies and TV shows. Okay. The first record I ever bought was for a TV series called Davy Crockett, which was presented by Walt Disney. And it was this story about this guy who was a scout and a settler in America in the 17th or 18th century. And I loved that song, and I played it to death. Now, I have 6,000 albums. Imagine how often I played it when I had 145 record. Drove my parents crazy, and they gave me the radio from the kitchen. So I would just listen to the radio instead of playing this song all day, And out of that radio, came these great songs, and I'd listen at night to different DJs. This is a world you don't know about, okay? Where every night you would turn on a radio show and it would be hosted by a disc jockey who had a style and a personality, and there was a continuity to it. He would talk about the songs, and then every Saturday night, you could call in and vote for what was the greatest oldie of all time, meaning previous song. Now, when I say oldie, rock and roll had only existed for 5 years, okay, at this point. So I would hear these voices. It was a style of singing and music called doo-wop.
Mm-hmm.
And what doo-wop was mostly, almost 3/4 of it were African American, but what it was a class structure. And people who lived in what would be called, as a value judgment, a lower class would get together on street corners at night or hang out and sing songs they'd heard, and they'd sing them in harmonies. And it's called doo-wop because since they didn't have any instruments, they would fill in the instruments' roles by singing nonsense syllables. Okay, like bomba da bomba dang a dang dang a ding a dong ding blue moon bloom. They would have sha na na na, things like that, and it had a unique sound. But what was great about it was the best of them were totally honest, and it was a bunch of friends who had written a song together and sang it together. It may be the only song they ever got recorded, but you were catching 3 minutes of their life, which they probably got paid $400 for, and owned no rights to it. And that music came into my room through this radio. But it was a two-way thing. It was a radio, but it was a window into another world. And that's what the Murray the K show I listened to and was to me. So it was doo-wop, and then there was pop music. It was called girl groups. And then he said, there's this new kind of music from California. It's called surf music. And he plays the Beach Boys singing Surfing USA. I mean, it fucking blew my mind. Let's go surfing now. Everybody's learning now. Come on a safari with me. These voices, And then this group from England, the Beatles, So that was what the music was doing and carrying me along. And I liked any movie with songs in it,
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of the really sort of, they're not so good rock and roll movies,
Mm-hmm.
And that guy, Frank Tashlin, did a good one called The Girl Can't Help It. So that was what was going on simultaneously. And so my parents would take us to the movies, and you would go to the local theater on a Wednesday night. I just distinctly remember this. And they said, oh, let's go to a movie. There's a new movie at the Lee Theater. I hear it's great. It's by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, Hitchcock's who we study now.
Yeah.
So we're just piling in the car and going to see this movie at the Lee Theater, And it's North by Northwest. Now, do you know that Hitchcock?
I know
It's
him.
Yeah, it's an unbelievably great masterpiece, chase movie. And it's like, I'm so thoroughly entertained by it. And this is what we saw all the time because these were the active filmmakers,
Mm-hmm.
And so the Lee Theater is where I went. That's where I saw my first James Bond movie. I saw From Russia with Love there. As a 14-year-old kid seeing From Russia with Love, and that action and everything was like, whoa, can't wait for the next one. So they took us into the city to see like Lawrence of Arabia. Do you know that movie?
Yeah, definitely.
Imagine seeing it on a giant screen, So you saw that. You saw all those big movies. Now, these movies were exotic. I didn't know anything about Lawrence, let alone Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
These were all other experiences. And the Beatles came along in January of 1964. And everyone who was my age saw them on TV on a Sunday night. And then every kid in America wanted to join a band the next day, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they set up like one camera head on, one camera from the side. Basically, the cameras didn't move, they just filmed what was there. Somebody had set up the side angle, which worked particularly well because you saw in a one shot in a row John, Paul, and George. Okay. Raking shot. And while they're singing, they're actually looking at each other and communicating. They're human beings who are realizing that at that moment, they are the biggest band in the world. It had never occurred to them that that could ever happen. All right. And it was so exciting. And then 4 months later, so this is February, in the summer, August, they have a movie that's coming out, and it's called A Hard Day's Night. And so I'm playing all this music to death. My parents are the Beatles coming out of their ears now. I have my own record player in my room, and I would go into the living room and use the big record player to play at full volume and all this stuff. And so I go the very first night to see it. It's a Friday night. Now, at the beginning, have you ever seen A Hard Day's
Oh,
Night?
I've seen it. It's like a very formative movie for me. I love it. I've seen it many times.
Okay, so let's talk about the first shot and what that shot means. Okay. You have a huge chord, which is not in any particular key, right? And it just goes bong. And then they come in, and what do you see on a long lens? The Beatles running towards you, and all these girls chasing them, and the song going on. Now, the song has been on the radio, so you know the song.
Mm-hmm.
And in this shot, George Harrison trips and falls down. And John picks him up, and they keep running. Right away, they have broken the rules of every single movie you've ever seen. It's clearly that he fell. But they you don't know this, but they have not done another take. They put that in. You have seen a glimpse. This is all psychological. You have seen a glimpse of this must be the real Beatles because this happened to them. Clearly on film, they tripped. And so the illusion that you are seeing the real Beatles is started from 20 seconds into the movie. And the way that they play off of each other, and the fact that it's shot black and white, handheld, just cameras just there. There's no formality to how it's shot because of the genius of Richard Lester, who was chosen by the Beatles to direct this. And they had seen his shorts. Really, really get to you. And it's also clearly us versus them. The generation gap. That is the message underneath it all, is that we are different. So when the man doesn't want to open the window in their car, they get into it with him. They make jokes that like, well, we won the war for you kind of things, right? So right away, it's us versus them. And so you're totally sympathizing. Plus, they're a lot funnier than you would ever be and smarter and seem to have the answer to everything. And then Paul's father gets loose, and now they put him in a cage in the baggage car. So you're watching this scene. Now, remember, all the formal ways that you have seen music presented, they start singing in the cage in the baggage car. They're playing cards. The cards change into a harmonica, and they're playing. So it's not on a stage. The camera is right there with them. And the blocking of the scene expresses musically what's going on in the moment.
It's all
you could look at that and without even the sound, you could know how the music works. John's got the harmonica, George is playing rhythm behind. And Ringo is right there. You're over Ringo's shoulder as he plays the drums. And it's magical. And then in the middle of the song, the camera is outside the cage and starts circling the Beatles. And all of a sudden, the camera operator starts dancing with even the camera cannot escape the joy of the Beatles. And the rest of the movie was that. There's a big concert at the end, and then the Beatles are leaving, and the screen goes black. And then all of a sudden, it lights up, and you realize that you are looking at the bottom of a helicopter. And now the Beatles, like gods on earth, ascend into the sky, right?
Yeah.
And on the helicopter, the father has all these pictures, and they throw the pictures out the window, and they flutter all around, and they fly off onto your radio. So I am like stunned. I am so stunned, I just walk home. And I walk into my house, and my parents said, oh, because I was so excited about it. They had before, and they were like, oh, you're home. How was your Beatle movie? You know what? When your parents say your guitar or your Beatle, I said, I actually signed it, and I thought, and I said, I think it was really well directed. I had never used that word before, but it was clear that somebody had taken all my feelings about this music. It's one of the few times I actually had knowledge beforehand of what was going to be on the screen. It's not Lawrence of Arabia. It's the people I listened to, and had made it into something that expressed it in ways that were beyond my imagination, but that made sense. And that's when I started thinking that's when movies started taking a new point of view, because it felt like they could be made. I started to understand how they were being made. And that's so between, the diversity brought about of the music and that Satyajit Ray movie, and the inner expressionistic and emotions channeled into technique. I'm analyzing it now from a distance of 60 years. That's what lured me into the music. So that covers 1 and 2. And literature.
Yeah.
You asked me about literature.
Yeah.
I am actually working on a short film about this. I guess what really got me was storytelling, whether it be songs that told stories, and there certainly were some. I thought they were very amusing. And this DJ would tell you a story, and the punchline to the story would be the first line of a song, or the stories I saw on TV. And once I figured out how to read, and I realized that a book was a story, not a series of pages with separate events on them, right? Mm-hmm. I was like stunned by this. And every Friday, I would go to the Fort Lee Library in my grammar school, number 4, and they let you take out 3 books. And then I would talk my sister into taking out 3, 2 of which would go to me. And I would spend the weekend reading all 5 of these books, And I decided I was going to read almost every book worth reading in the number 4 school library, And that's where and between that and encouragement from my father, who gave me his copy of Mark Twain's book. So that's how I read his copy of Tom Sawyer, right? Which he told me was really great. And I'm going to love the first scene in it where Tom talks all his friends into painting the fence. And so he had a collection of Mark Twain, and I basically read all of them. I could not, when I wasn't watching TV, I was reading. I was totally escapist. And I would go to my room and read books and pretend I couldn't hear my parents when they called me to dinner, you know. And I'd read at night and they'd make me turn off the lights, and then I would take out a flashlight and read, you know. So that continued all the way through junior high school and into high school and beyond. I am still a big reader, and the aspect of study is a basic part of me. Uh, Not in high school, it was frustrating because their idea of studying was memorization.
Mm-hmm.
That was not, I didn't, sure, I could do that, you know, but I would want to read things on topics that I liked. And the stuff that I was reading already was encouraging me to read more. And they used to have this thing in high school called study hall. And what that was is when you had a full day of whatever number of classes, it'd always be a class that wouldn't fit in the schedule, or you had a hole in your schedule, and then you'd go to the library for study hall. You're supposed to do your homework. And I would read all the new magazines. And that's where I was introduced to something called the new journalism, which was Tom Wolfe and people like that. So I was learning about the world through these magazines, which were at the time, I didn't realize were in a whole new peak of information. And I just trusted whatever books I could get out of the library. And then I read a book called Catcher in the Rye.
I just reread that recently.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did it work for you?
Okay, the first time I read it was 8th grade, and I honestly, like, I just thought it was annoying, so I put it down. And then recently I was like, you know what? Like, that happened with Fight Club, and when I reread it, I loved it. So let me try Catcher in the Rye again. And I don't think I didn't like change my life, but I did resonate with it a lot, because there's a definite part of the character that, like, maybe I don't want to acknowledge, but I'm like, yeah, that's like part of me, you know, that bitterness.
It gets you because when you read it at the teenage years, it's about where you are at and your insecurities and the fact that you are torn between wanting to grow up and not grow up.
Mm-hmm.
And how you find teenagers are very judgmental.
Yes.
And Holden Caulfield is nothing if not judgmental. And he's funny about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he, at the end, is finally catching up with his sister, Phoebe, and he goes to see her on the merry-go-round in the park. So he's thinking about his youth, because that's his problem. He can't face the fact that he's not a kid anymore, and he can't adapt to responsibility. And he sees written on that wall, "Fuck you." And he goes, I need to save all these kids from that.
Mm-hmm.
I need to save them from being adults and the intrusion of the adult world. Mm-hmm. Now, that is profound. And the book is banned at the time, it was banned in all high schools, all schools. So they didn't have it in the Fort Lee Library. Somehow I heard of it and I bought the paperback. Maybe that's one reason why it sold so many paperbacks, And so at a certain point, I was looking for books and go to the school library, and they wouldn't have them. They'd say, we don't carry that book. Then I'd go to the main library in town. Those books are banned. We don't carry those books. Now, in looking back, remember, this is like 1965, so it's been 20 years since World War II, which was a big marker.
Mm-hmm.
And in those, so there was an article I read about the greatest book since World War II, not an unusual topic. And I'd only read one of them, and that was Catcher in the Rye. So I knew I should read the rest of them. School didn't have them. The main library didn't have them. And I went downtown to New York and I Greenwich Village. This is my introduction to beatnik stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I got them. And in retrospect, or maybe I had an inkling at the time, that all the books that were banned were not by white men. I didn't formulate this, but I was never given a book in high school, in school, that was written by a African American or an Asian. Never. Or if there was, it was like a short story. Maybe one woman. And that's who those books were, you know. And so um, those are some of the formative things. And so I read a lot of those books. Uh, they were The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, Herzog by Saul Bellow, you know, um, great, great books. And I continued. And in at a certain way, I was also introduced to the Beat Generation and poems and stuff like that. So now all that expanded. So that fed into the fact that I was also seeing more and more movies that were not just run of the mill movies, although I certainly loved my Doris Day movies and things like that. She was an early female prototype
Mm-hmm.
that is worth studying from a feminist point of view where you are, because she was a woman who had a job or was the head of a family and was very stylish and funny. And she was a huge star. And they're interesting movies because of that. They're witty. And so I started going to see movies my parents had recommended, you know, or they had seen. And because, man, that James Bond movie was great. So what else you got, you know? And so that was the path that led me to think that maybe I should study film. Is that possible? I have a book on film. There must be more, you know? It was not available, you know? And there was no writing at all about music,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that I ever saw, you know? So that's when I tried to talk my parents and my guidance counselor into letting me maybe go to a college and study film. And America at the time, there's only 3 schools that taught it. And they talked me out of all of it. And it took me 2 years. So that's how I ended up in film school. So that was the path. And I ended up in Greenwich Village, in the part of town where I bought all those books and where the theaters were that played rock and roll. So it was all coming together to the fall of 1967 when I moved into 10th Street and 2nd Avenue in the East Village. And my life changed from that. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. So, next question. Does that tie up a lot of the things you were asking
Yeah,
about?
yeah, definitely. For sure.
Okay. The visual gags I told you about. I think the last time I might have told you about Lou Reed. John Densmore, we were looking for a drummer
Mm-hmm.
to play the part of Toad. And the joke about Toad is one, there was a group called Cream
Yeah.
with Eric Clapton, and they do a big drum solo on one of their first records. And that drum solo was called Toad. And that's why I named him Toad, because you go see a Cream concert and everyone go crazy over this giant drum solo. Uh, what was it like working with the Ramones on set?
Like,
They were bored being on the set because our time was there. They had their own, we gave them a little black and white TV and we fed them and everything. And they chose the songs. It was their choice of what songs to sing in the show on the concert stuff. And we recorded I Want You Around uh, for the movie. And that was the first scene that we shot with them, was in that bedroom. So that's how Joey and I first worked together. Oh, uh, so I got to, they came, I went and saw them in New York about 4 months, 3 months before the movie started, and hung out with them over the weekend and got to meet some of the members of the Talking Heads who came by and all these rock critics and so forth. And it was like a dream come true for me. And then they came out and we tried to read the script. Hopeless, hopeless. Dee Dee could barely read. They couldn't read, they were supposed to have read the script and they never read the script. And the rehearsal was a joke. So I realized that it couldn't rehearse. So I wanted to make sure they understood what was ahead for them. So they came over to my apartment and I invited the writers and we watched A Hard Day's Night. And they had never realized that A Hard Day's Night had lip syncing, that it wasn't live. So we talked about that. Okay. And that's when we started to get to know each other. And they saw my record collection and they were very worried about the movie because I had Grateful Dead records. And that was a no. How can you like them and us? How I don't understand it. Explain this. Do you like them or what? So that was like a
black Grateful Dead fan. Him and Greg Ginn from Black Flag.
Wait, I didn't understand what you said.
I know I was saying that. Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Henry Rollins and Greg Ginn from Black Flag, they were both huge Grateful Dead fans. Sonic Youth guys too.
Yeah, but then this is 1978. There was like death to hippies. The punk movement was a reaction to it.
Yeah.
And I was saying to them when they asked me this, I said, because you're both auteurs. You both take music and make it sound your own. So if you decided to play a Grateful Dead song, Truckin', you would sound great doing it and it would be 2 minutes long. And if the Dead decided to sing I Want to Be Sedated, it would be their version of it and it'd be 10 minutes long, and they go, oh, all right. So that's what was interesting. And I got to be pretty good friends with Joey, and he had ADHD and he would repeat actions and he was kind of I'll just say wasn't together as a person of his age.
Yeah.
And he had to be tended to and so forth, but he was a really sweet man and very vulnerable. And my wife cooked him a cake and we had a birthday party at the Tropicana with him. And we used to play later on Trivial Pursuits. They were really good at Trivial Pursuits. Only though the topic they were great at was geography because they had been everywhere. So they knew everything about geography, because they travel everywhere by bus. So that's what it was like with him. And I stayed friends with Joey for years and years and years. And every year on his birthday, I would happen to be in New York in May for business. We would go out and have dinner together, or he'd go to a concert and so forth. He liked Indian food a lot, and so forth. And, we were very good friends till he passed away. Okay. How did Andy Kaufman get involved in the movie? He was cast in the movie. He was a happening comedian. The movie is bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad. And it was a very bad transition for me from working with people my own age, all film students, all pulling together to people who were doing it for the money, who were workers. And I didn't adjust to it well. I was one of the youngest people on the set, and I was pretentious, and I did not do a good job because I misunderstood. I didn't adapt to what they wanted from me. I made a movie that was based on a silent movie love story, and they wanted a crazy, wacky movie about robots with Andy Kaufman, and I didn't get that. And so I put constraints on everybody, and it was not my genre. And years later, if you get the the Blu-ray that's out. They called me up and they said, would you do a commentary for the new Blu-ray of Heartbeats? Now, I had been fired from that movie and they had recut it. I'd only seen it once since then. And I said, that means I got to watch it, you know? And I did not want to. And then I said, you know what? Man up, you know? Every Friday, you go in front of all your students and you give them notes on what their early attempts are. And you try to understand them. Why don't you do that? When you do your commentary, act like it's not yours, it's another person's film, and give them the notes. And that's what I did. So it's pretty interesting for that. And the commentary gets better reviews than the movie does. So that was that.
I
Um,
worked with him because, like, for me, I mean, he's like one of my favorite. I don't even know if I'd call him a comedian, like performers. But to imagine him as like a person and not just like this enigmatic thing is like so
I
weird.
know, and I should have had him do all different characters. I did the whole thing wrong. You know, let's move on.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
so you like Iggy Pop?
I
I
love
like
Iggy
Iggy
Pop.
Pop.
My main
Okay.
goal for this is just to talk to him and then I'm done. I don't need to talk to any other people.
Okay. So I heard about Iggy Pop in Rolling Stone magazine because they were doing an article about a band called the MC5.
Mhm.
Have you heard of
Yeah, I
them?
love them.
Okay, so and in that article they mentioned that this guy Danny Fields had signed the MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges in the same weekend. Danny became the manager of the Ramones. That's how, and I got to know Danny. At the time, I didn't know Danny. So the MC5 actually played the Fillmore, and I saw them live. And they were incredibly loud. And they were there on a night where the theater was free, sponsored by the record company. And the local street people had always demanded free concerts, and they flooded in the theater. And it was kind of a very bad scene going on with the MC5 playing and everything. And they were so loud that the flags on their amps would flutter a little bit. Um, I thought that they were very, very powerful, and I liked the first album a lot. But at the end of the concert, the stage was swarmed by all the local wild people. There was an organization called the Up Against the Wall Motherfuckers, okay? Or Motherfuckers for short. They lived in my building and they charged at the MC5. And when they saw that the MC5 had come to the concert in a limo, they felt the MC5 had sold out even as their first record was coming out. And they turned on them and they stole all their equipment. So it was a disastrous concert from a point of view of a concert, but from a point of view of being there was pretty exciting, you know. And the head of the theater was hit in the head by one of the street people. It was ugly, you know. So, um, so I liked 1969 and I liked the Iggy stuff, and I saw on TV his infamous appearance at the Cincinnati Rock
Mhm.
Festival. I actually watched that on TV, so I saw him dive into the crowd. And I thought that was the funniest thing because the guy who hosted it, they had no idea how to do this. So they were doing it from a point of view of a network, you know. And the person who hosted it used to host Rose Bowl parade or Miss America, you know. Jack Westcooley was not any connection. I mean, at the Fillmore, the guy who would come up on stage was one of us, you know. So when Iggy dove into the audience, they didn't know what to do. So they cut to commercial. They said, "We're going to go to a commercial so Mister Iggy comes back." And I come back from a commercial. He's out there in the crowd, and that's when he rubbed himself in the peanut butter and everything. And I thought, all right, I like this band. So I used to listen to them a lot. And then I followed his exploits and I bought his records because I really liked his music, especially obviously when he went with Bowie, that was a major thing. And we were doing a TV show called Shannon's Deal, which was a lawyer show written by a guy named John Sayles, a really, really good writer and a really good show. And I got hired to do an episode about a company, about a woman who had written songs and sent them to this company. And the idea was the company would take your words and set them to music and send them back to you. That was the deal. Words to music. You paid $200. Well, this company had taken her song, put music on it, and given it to a famous singer, and it had become a big hit. And she was totally ripped off. So she goes to see this lawyer to straighten this out. And the idea is you trace all this. And in the course of it, we meet a crazy punk street person who knew something about this, and that was Iggy. So we cast Iggy in it. And Iggy sings on this show, Search and Destroy.
That's incredible.
And I got to produce that session with Iggy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we did it in about 2 or 3 hours. And the joke was no drugs, just jelly donuts. And David Crosby of Crosby, Stills and Nash is in it. And Tanya Tucker, who's a famous country singer, plays the famous singer. So Iggy and I became friends. And then I found out that some very close friends of ours had grown up, were on the wealthy side of the tracks from Iggy in Ann Arbor, Detroit. And she had hired the Iguanas to play at her Sweet 16 party.
That's awesome.
And so I had a lunch in my house where she got to reunite with Iggy. So Iggy and I stayed in touch over the years. We've gone different ways, but I've seen him in concert and hung out with him a little bit and so forth, you know. So that's your Iggy question. Okay. So the bands that you listed, I have one or two Dinosaur Jr. records, and I kind of like him, that guitar sound. I think he's really good. I have all the Sonic Youth records. I thought Nirvana were just great.
Mm-hmm.
Within reason, I like Hole, especially the first record. Doll Parts and so forth are really great. I love that whole Riot Girl movement of Bikini Kill. I mean, if you look at Get Crazy, you see the influence of all these people. In the Nada band, the part of the band looks like Bikini Kill and all the hardcore punkers. And Steve Albini, I like Pavement. I knew Black Flag's music a little bit. New bands, I spend 3/4 of my listening time and record buying time buying artists that I already have, that their music is reissued. And there are rare sessions, or there are other versions of it, or live concerts. So I have every Bob Dylan box set, you know, and Grateful Dead box set, and I go back and listen to Miles Davis. I listen to the artists that I think I have a personal connection to. Like I would buy a Neil Young record. I buy Neil Young records without knowing them first. It's like I'm not going to not pick up the phone if Neil Young calls me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are my friends. I mean, Van Morrison, I saw in '67. So I've been listening to him without fail. So I can't not listen to him. You know, that would be insulting, you know. So Rolling Stones, all these groups that I've spent my life listening to that have been the soundtrack to my life, I'm entranced when there's a new version of the album, you know. It always is never as good as I hoped it would be, but I could see why they rechanged it, you know. But I buy that, and I buy concerts and so forth by that. But I have always prided myself about remaining open. So when I moved to Los Angeles, I didn't just listen to the bands that I had listened to in New York at the Fillmore. I started listening to Jackson Brown, and to Linda Ronstadt Eagles and that sound.
Yeah.
And then when punk came along, I started listening to punk. And when African music started being distributed here, I have a whole shelves full of international music. So I have always taken pride of at least trying the new stuff. You ever hear of a band called Smashing
Oh
Pumpkins?
yeah, I love them.
Okay. I have three Smashing Pumpkins records. They do not work for me. Okay. But I have them. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
every couple of years, I'll give it another try and go, no, it's just what I remembered. Because I often would buy records that critics that I like would recommend. And so, if they gave it this guy named Rob Christgau, if he gave it an A, I would buy it. That's how I got the first Ramones record. He gave it an A, so I bought it. So the new people that I listen to, there's a singer named Jenny Lewis. Now, I started buying Jenny's records because she was in a band called Rilo Kiley. And the reason I did that is because that show I told you about, Shannon's Deal, that
Yeah.
Iggy was on, she played the daughter on that show. And she used to bring her guitar in to work and sit and play guitar. And she and I became friends, and I talked to her about music, and I gave her mixtapes. And years later, I saw her at a concert, and she pulled me over and said to the band, "This is the guy who told me about the Velvet Underground." So I love Jenny Lewis's records, and my daughters adore her. So Jenny Lewis is major. Um, a group called Soccer Mommy.
Oh,
I
I
like
know who
Soccer
they
Mommy.
are.
Yeah. Um, I've just in the last 2 years started listening to Taylor Swift, and how an artist that makes such a huge impact, it's worth listening to.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it on Spotify, and then I decided to get a little more serious about it because just the curiosity. So I started looking up best of Taylor Swift record, lists by critics, and I started buying her stuff, and I made a mix of Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, Waxahachie, Nico Case, Jenny Lewis, all these great contemporary women. Uh, Obviously, Beyonce is beyond. Beyonce is the major artist of this century. And I made this mix. It's like 6 hours long. And if their songs remind me of a song, because everything is just one vast river of music, I would put in uh, the songs that remind me of it. So it's this huge collection of songs from everything since I listened to girl groups.
Have you ever listened to Clairo before?
Who's that?
It's like
How do you spell it?
Clairo. She started as like a bedroom pop kind of singer, and then I didn't really wasn't that into that kind of stuff. But 2 years ago, made this record called Charmed, I think, and it was
Okay.
really good because it's like she's got this modern thing kind of going, but you can tell she's kind of into that 60s stuff, which is more of my vibe.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's pretty popular, and I like her quite a bit.
Okay. So I will find that. Um, and, talk about new music. I was in San Francisco, and this is like right around Rock and Roll High School. And there was a punk club in San Francisco called the Mabuhay Gardens, and they were put up a flyer. The two bands were playing that weekend, and just the name of the two bands that I got to see who they are. I'd never heard them. One was called the Weirdos, right? Would you go see a band called the Weirdos? And the other was called the Go-Go's. So I saw an early version of the Go-Go's when they only knew 4 songs. And I saw the Go-Go's many times in LA when they were a punk band. And I loved the LA punk scene. So I think that X is a great,
Mhm.
great band. They're one of my all-time favorites. So that takes me through that stuff. Okay. For Mr. Erico, Fort Lee, New Jersey. Okay. He's talking about Jersey City. I was only born in Jersey City.
Okay.
I lived in Fort Lee. And have you ever seen The Sopranos?
Yeah, a little bit.
That's what that's I went to school with uh what's his name? Tony Soprano was in my class. Okay. That's who I grew up with. Fort Lee, New Jersey was a blue collar town with a lot of Italian Americans whose parents were often worked in construction. Okay. And the reason I can say that is that there was a guy who lived in Fort Lee named Albert Anastasia. Okay. Have you seen The Godfather?
Not all of it.
Okay. There's a big meeting in it among the five mafia families. Albert Anastasia would have been at that table. Okay. Albert Anastasia lived in Fort Lee in a big stone house in a part of the town that almost nobody lived in, the best land. And he was murdered in a barbershop when I was about 8 years old, shot to death, just like in The Godfather. And there was another guy in our town named Gallo, Joey Gallows, and he had a kid. And he was in my school. And then all of a sudden, he was not in school anymore. So they went witness protection. So there was that atmosphere, and that feeling for it. So when I saw the pilot for The Sopranos, it totally blew my mind because I knew these people.
Yeah.
My view of them would be like the daughter and the son going over someone's house. I'm seeing the Catholic symbolism on the wall and all that stuff, and the grandmother. So that show really got to me. And so that is my connection. So I was well aware of all of this out. And so I have my 25th or 30th reunion. I can't remember. And I take out my yearbook and I'm looking at it because I'm trying to remember everybody. And I turn to my wife and say, "Hey, Joanne, look at this. This is what my class looked like." It's a shot of everyone in the auditorium in an assembly. And in my school, because we were so ill behaved, does not even do justice to how insane the boys were in this school, how many fights they got into. They made everyone wear a tie to school, that somehow that would make us better. So everyone's in a tie or a tie and jacket in this auditorium. And my wife looks at it and goes, "So you went to high school with the cast of Goodfellas." So that kind of sums it up. Okay, that's about it.
All right. Yeah, thank you for being here. I mean,
You're welcome. You're welcome. I feel like I should send you my mix of all these women,
yeah, I will listen to that definitely. Just send it over
you
to
know,
me,
or okay, I wonder if I can send you some of my mixes through what's called WeTransfer.
Okay.
You know what WeTransfer is?
I think I've
It's for
heard of it.
sending larger packages of things.
Okay.
And I have, hang on. Since 1976, I have been making mixtapes.
Mhm. Yeah.
I have 400 of them. And at a certain point, they all have different themes. Uh, and I didn't want them to fall apart, and I have made digital files of
Okay.
them. So I can send you some of those digital files.
Yeah, totally.
And that way you'll have them. And here's how they got made. I took my cassettes. They started out as cassette. So it's a cassette recording of a vinyl record, or in some cases CDs, which I did on a cassette player, and I would play the song, and at the end of the song I'd stop it, and then I would cue up the next song, and as it came around on the turntable I'd start it, so I made all these transitions live, okay, and they're all different themes. Now that I know you a little bit, I can send you ones I think you might find amusing. I'm sure you'd want to hear my taste in punk music, and all kinds of stuff. I made about 6 of them, all based on women's music from around the world on different themes. Okay, I always came up with different themes. There's a whole bunch of guitar heavy records, real boy rock. There's ones called Killer Guitars from Hell. That's what that whole series is like. And I make up every year on my birthday, I make a mix. That is my diary of music for the year. So I will try and send you some of these. Okay.
Right.
And what you'll get is what'll look like 2 songs. Okay. So you would get, what's this one called? Oh, here it is. Killer Guitars from Hell. Okay. So you would get 2 songs called Killer Guitars from Hell. One song is A, one song is B. That's the 2 sides of the cassette. So I would take the cassette, play it on a cassette player into my computer, into what's called Garage Rock. I don't know if they still have that. And take it down to an MP3. So you would download it into your computer, and your computer would think it was one song, even though it's 45 minutes. So it would be 2 songs to get the whole tape. And the artist would be A. Arkush, but the name of the tape would tell you what it's about. So that's how it would work. It should be no problem.
Yeah.
The fidelity is what it is, So, okay.
All right. Thank you for being here. Those are some really cool.
No, thank you for doing the follow-up. It's a good idea.
Okay, then.
Okay. I will send you that stuff at some point, and we'll talk in the future.
Yep. Bye.
Good luck.